Um, Alright, I thought I would do a breakdown of the right's strategy for the culture war, politics, clash of civilizations, and so on. Now, this is going to be um, basically from the right's perspective, but I'm going to try and explain the concepts or the strategies in a way that the left can understand that hopefully tells them that um, they should back off. This is a difficult task because we're so diametrically opposed often, but I'm going to try and give as honest an account of the right's total strategy and mindset, so that the left is not caught unawares of the right's movements going forwards and the general plan to give them awareness of the exact map. And someone might say, oh, but that'll give the left abilities to counter us. But the answer, I think, is more along the lines of yes, if the left are truly despicable to beyond any measure, and they are smart enough to understand this strategy set, then they could theoretically counter it. But I'm going to try and make the strategic analysis available to the left in good faith so that the left can calm down, because I remember being leftist and thinking Stephen Harper was a fascist and so on. So, I know it's possible to turn right wing from the left eventually if good, honest arguments are made for doing so to people with some set of values they won't compromise on. Now, I know that part of the left often seems to be hypocritical, and I get that, but it's one of those things I want to do anyways, and maybe this is just for a friend even, who's kind of communist. But I thought I would go through a full detail and maybe some reasoning and so on. So that's the point of this video. I already gave them a list of why we're doing things and as the right and so on, and our reasoning and so on from the inside, sort of to advertise that he should calm down a bit. But this will be like that, but for the wider audience with a few more details possibly. So basically what the left is doing right now is it's going to start deporting immigrants, illegal immigrants, from our countries when we get in power. And that is going to be an attack on the left's power base, essentially, their client classes. And the reason is to weaken the left and also get rid of people who are far more criminal as a demographic per capita than the native-born citizens of North America and Europe. So it serves two purposes. It weakens the left, but it also gets rid of genuinely horrible people way more than cracking down on the native citizens of the West ever could. Much more quickly and easily, and more criminality averted in our borders. The left can say, oh, but if you send them home, there'll be criminals there. Yeah, but the other places have the death penalty for things, and they can just end the criminal if they want to. And he's born and raised over there, so he's their problem that they caused, so they can deal with it. And then they might say, oh, it's not fair to them. Well, like, how many Arena Zaritskas do we need before we say, okay, yeah, it is their fault that they, like, stab people to death, and we should kill them so they don't stab other people to death? Again, right? You know. And this requires basic law and order, basic consequences for, like, doing bad things, right? Like, genuinely horrible things. Like, calling someone the N-word or, like bundle of sticks slur for gays is nowhere near as bad as stabbing a Ukrainian refugee in the neck. Let's be honest here. You know. And Daniel Penny is nowhere near as bad as that other guy that he strangled to death, who was like threatening little ladies and shit. You know. I mean, let's make a basic values calculation. Someone's schizo. Okay, I've been schizo. I've acted out. I get it. I got shot for acting out. Except in my case, I gambled on the fact that I'd get shot because I was trying to get shot. So I wasn't actually a threat to anyone. But I made it look like I was a threat because I knew I'd get shot. You know. Because now that's a little. I know people will give all sorts of arguments for why that was bad, and I get it. But at the time, I thought it was so horrible that I couldn't do anything except die to pay for it, or like stop my evil. Because basically, what happened was I took the Epstein assassination and cover up. I took the COVID outbreak, and I took the Ukraine-Russian war personally, essentially. I thought, oh well, that's somehow my fault. Because I've had some like political influence, I think, I'm not entirely sure, in the past. And I was like, oh, if I had that level of influence on some level, then I guess these things are my fault. That's kind of how I took it. So it's like, okay. Now, and also, I think I genuinely had a psychotic break. So when I'm saying take out people that are psychotic and threatening and attacking everyone, I'm not speaking from just a sort of like oh, it's them. I mean, like, it's like what I expected for myself and acted in accordance with the expectation that it would happen to me. Like, I got served a heaping plate of pain, but I expected it, and that's why I was doing it, because I was feeling so guilty for geopolitical events and so on that were beyond my control. And they're genuinely horrible things, or at least the vaccines are. But at the time, I took the COVID to be the genuinely horrible thing. And don't get me wrong, plagues and diseases are pretty awful. But like, you know what I mean? But like, what's primarily bad? You know. But even in the case of me, I acted out a few times inappropriately. From the sheer stress of thinking I had to stab myself through the heart in order to atone for my sins, essentially. And even then, it wouldn't be good enough, and I'd still go to hell, but God told me to do it because I was so guilty. And look, let's face it, I am genuinely guilty of a few things, but I've kind of, after 46 attempts at atoning hardcore, let's put it that way, and some gentle caring for by God and so on, I'm beginning to kind of go like, okay, I can move on from it. It was a phase. I had to go through that in order to make peace with myself and with God. But it brought me closer to Christ, and no one can say I didn't pay a very heavy price in terms of experience and physicality, agony, near death, and so on, self-inflicted out of a sense of guilt. So no one can say I didn't genuinely feel guilty and act on it to pay for my sins or wrongdoings or whatever. So it's like all wrapped up neatly. It's one of the things God does when He works on you. He kind of makes things work. But even so, I acted out a few times, and it was not good. And that was even with me primarily just stabbing myself. I didn't stab anyone else. I didn't attack anyone with a knife. I did approach some cops. That is when I got shot. But that was that was knowing that approaching with a knife would get me shot. So that's like, I mean, the purpose was to get shot. Like, I was trying to die to pay for my sins. It's not like I was trying to threaten anyone, and like act out on it. But even so, I operated under the assumption acting out would get you hurt, and it played out in my case. And I'm happy that it did. I apologized to the cop, by the way. So I said they did exactly the right thing, and don't worry about it. I get it. It was my fault, you know. Sorry, it's a little emotional actually when I think about it. It's pretty hardcore. Yeah, 46 atonement attempts is a little hardcore. But that's just how guilty I felt. Maybe I shouldn't have felt that guilty, but at the same time, I was like, better safe than sorry theologically or spiritually is my. I'm a little neurotic, so I wanted to make sure I was good with God. Let's put it that way. And I did do some genuinely bad things, so it's like, it's not totally empty. It's like, holy crap, dude, maybe not quite that bad, but at the same time, some of it was definitely deserved. So it's one of those things. So it's like, people fall under two camps and they both get it wrong, which is, a premature end, self-directed, is a sin, and you shouldn't do that, and you should feel bad for doing that. Or they're like, oh, you've done it now. Nothing you can ever do can fix it. And it's like no matter what I do, it's never good enough. Basically, it's kind of the approach people take of that. But I'm beginning to chalk this up to most people have no sense of honor. Now, I violated my code of honor a few times, which is why I felt guilty. And it's not a perfect code of honor, and it's not like I was doing small things. But I had a code of honor, and I acted on my code of honor in regards to judging myself. When I remembered what I did after putting it away by drinking myself to forgetfulness, essentially, for a while, and serving a cause and like developing morally and so on. Stronger positive morals as opposed to harm reduction. So what's good, not just what's least harmful, is kind of how I changed. So I want to do good, not do what I want as least harmful as possible. So it's basically God's will be done, not my own will be done. Transition. Now, this is important because a lot of the people acting out don't have this basis. They don't have a self-guilt, self-destruction impulse. They have a everyone else is at fault, lash out at society impulse. And that is much more harmful. Now, in my own case, you actually can say, in my case, that the sheer level of suffering I had broke me a few times and I snapped. But that's because I was so insistent on hurting myself instead of other people that I just like lost it due to sheer exhaustion of my discipline. You know, not because they don't have discipline to begin with necessarily. Um, uh, One's breaking point essentially, and I think you can see how someone could get to the breaking point if they think God told them to atone with their life, and yet they would still go to hell. And then told them to do it again and again and again and again and again, and it hurts a lot every time, and you nearly die, and it's like, when is this going to end? When am I actually going to? When is it going to stop? Essentially, by hook or crook, by succeeding in my attempt, or by God not telling me to do it again, right? Like one or the other. So in my case, that's what it looks like when someone genuinely wants to do good, essentially, when they've screwed up in the past. And that's important because too many people confuse being perfect with being good or being awful, like the worst person ever, with being merely flawed, right? Like they either expect you to be perfect or they say, I don't have any standards for you at all, basically. And that's not healthy in society, right? Like the Christian way of approaching this is both perfection and total depravity. It's to say you're totally depraved without Christ, but in Christ you don't have to be perfect because He's perfect for you. You just want to be better, and God will get you to where you need to be because He's the one that reached out to you and took your hand and led you further into the future in a good way. You know, and I know and I've got all these sort of scrupulosity, sort of like, oh, but did God really do that? Do I really believe in Jesus? And like all this, like, do I really believe in God or not? Kind of worries because I want to, or I want to, but I don't necessarily feel I always do necessarily. And it's like, it's really paralyzing. So I understand why people don't like Christianity, because that sort of experience is paralyzing to people and so on. And paralysis is not good in of itself just because you're refusing to do as steal a cookie from the family cookie jar or something. You know, better you steal a cookie and then like do a whole day's work to provide for the family, and then steal from the cookie jar when the wife or mother says you can't. You know what I mean? Um, but it's about priorities and like values and like right valuing of what thing to what degree and so on. You know, and that comes down to, and that leads to the politics I'm getting at here, which is the left catastrophizes everything. They say either everyone is so good they all deserve power, or they say everyone is so bad that we need like a special elite to rule over us all. Whereas the right says no one can be trusted with ultimate power, so we have democracy. And some people say the right doesn't have popular. The right, it's not popular in the right, but there are monarchists on the right that say the same sort of, we're all so bad we need a special elite to rule over us. Now the dynamic is the good or badness of the common man and the good or badness of the elite. And essentially what we should recognize is that the elite are like us in some ways, except better in some ways and worse in some ways. we do in fact need their skilled competitive edge and unique talents for the elite. But there is a framing where the common man is often better than the elites for things and should be respected in his own domain more often than the elites naturally do respect that. And the right's argument is essentially that the citizens or the ethnos, the ethnic makeup of the native-born citizens, and the nation and ethnos being similar words in Latin and Greek, which essentially means bloodline in some sense, or extended family, or extended tribe. There is an argument to be had for enforcing ethnic nationalism for the good of a society. Because if you're related genetically, and you have the same culture, then there's certain things you just automatically jive with. You can relate to someone. But if they have orange and blue morality, like child marriage at 9 in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you have black and white morality, like preying on children is a millstone offense, which means Jesus says to tie a millstone around someone's neck if they cause the little ones to stumble and throw them into the ocean with a big rock around their neck, then you can't get along properly. And forcing this on the average person, while some people might be citizens of the world, let's say, and be comfortable with it, most people are not. And recognizing that fact is actually kind of important. And no, the world will not become automatically better if you force people to act like citizens of the world or try to force them to be citizens of the world. Because people naturally attune towards people like them on some level. That's why leftists generally don't have right-wing friends, and right-wingers don't have leftist friends typically. But the divisions are civilizational, not just political left or right. And even amongst the right and the left, there's different factions like libertarianism or monarchism on the right, or like social democracy or anarchy on the left or something, or communism or socialism on the left, or reactionary Republican or Democratic. Almost 1800s-ism, like 1800s style attitudes with the same political system on the right. You can get into how the left is generally more intolerant of the right. But the right is drumming up the need for intolerance of the left right now. And there's arguments for why that's happening, but I'm just acknowledging it is happening. And the argument for it is essentially that, well, the left started this intolerance and we need to do it to them, so they learn that their intolerance of us has a cost and they don't want to pay it eventually, and then they'll become tolerant of us again. And then one could say, what about the immigrants? And the answer is we don't need to tolerate them. We need to get rid of them because they're per capita demographically way more criminal. Um, we don't need the population growth of immigration while we're dying off, essentially. Um, basic supply and demand. If you cram enough people into a place, their living standards will go to hell. Um, you know, that's basically what it comes down to. So that's why we don't want immigration. Well, aside from the cultural criminality differences and so on, and the sheer fact of orange and blue morality to each other versus black and white morality to each other. Um, um, and basically, the strategy is we're going to throw out the illegal immigrants first and decimate the client base of the left. And then we're going to possibly, I'm not sure, but possibly turn on the legal immigrants of third world nations. And then we're going to turn on the left, essentially. And the left will talk about the need to fight back and resist and shoot ICE agents and so on. But the right is going to basically go like, okay, Americans are not going to shoot ICE agents on behalf of illegals because they could get shot. We've established that. And if the left does it, we'll ask why they're targeting us when we're not targeting them, essentially, and invoke self-defense on the left to then target the left. And it's a deterrent from the left from getting involved in the immigration thing. And if the immigrant does it, then we're going to say, look how violent they are, we need to crack down on them harder. And since the zeitgeist is in favor of the right direction at the moment, because we've tried the left's stuff and multiculturalism, naturally more people are just going to be sympathetic to the hard right position if it's invoked, essentially. And that's not something the left can propagandize or complain about their way out of, essentially. It's just a matter of willpower on the right to do what the right actually wants to do, essentially. Now, this is... Now, yes, this does mean political action of the right against the left, and it is an undermining tactic of the left's power base. But honestly, from my experience, based on like the 90s and like 2000s and 2010s and 2020s, the left has gone completely insane, essentially. Totally against the foundation of civilization in the West. By my historical understanding of the West's various views in the past, and studies of like historical authors a little bit here and there and so on, and the general norm of civilizations when they're improving, essentially. Now, this isn't to say the left has no foundation whatsoever, but their foundation is the post-World War II consensus, not the millennia-old civilizational consensus. That's why they can say they're the normal people, essentially, because basically for a time, temporarily, but long enough to be beyond living memories beginning almost, essentially what happened is the left started to gain momentum because of the Nazis and their genocidal socialism. You'll notice that the left always hides from the fact that the Nazis were socialist. There are, in fact, um, some things about the right that the Nazis are similar on, but the genocidal nature of socialism is not one of those things that the right is similar to. That's a leftist thing. That's a leftist talking about the need to kill all the conservatives thing. That's a leftist jeering and cheering that they murdered Charlie Kirk, and he deserved it because he made a joke about a black woman once. That's the left's murderous intent, not the right's. The right is a very hard-nosed justice. Wrongdoing deserves retribution mindset. The left is a very anything for power. You're wrong because we are for the good things by definition because I said so kind of approach. And basically, what we have to do is essentially force the left to accept the right is not going anywhere and that it's going to be the dominant future for the next little while increasingly. Like the left might get in power once or twice in the next 20 years, but for a good long, like 15, 16 years or something, or like 14 to 16 years, it's going to be right-wing power. Like the left's basically spent for the next 20, 30 years probably because of its overreaches and abuses of people and so on. And once the right's in charge and they start actually doing what they want to do, I think the native-born citizens of the countries they're in are going to see radical improvement of their life back to 2000s levels or 1990s levels and so on. Essentially, with a traditional understanding of the world and an enchanted worldview, which means essentially that you believe things have meaning and purpose and so on. That things matter essentially. And what the left has done over the course of the post-World War II consensus is say that nothing matters essentially. It doesn't matter that you're being infringed on for the native-born citizens. Well, actually, no, sorry. They started with it doesn't matter to the richest people. Then they said it doesn't matter to the men, and then they said it doesn't matter to the women, and then they said it doesn't matter to the poorest people what happens to you. Right? It's a very nihilistic sort of nothing matters kind of a ideology of materialism. And the need for enchantment and purpose and meaningfulness, again, is a very right-wing, as the right-wing looks like today, kind of coded thing. But it's not just coded, it's embodied. And the embodiment is one of the advertisements for the right wing, aside from common sense, essentially, or logic and rationality, minus ad hominems or fallacies. It's the return of the little facts that don't line up ideologically to a simple worldview and the acceptance of paradoxes at the limits of human understanding And yet something is correct despite being seemingly paradoxical. Is the rebuilding of the structures of the West on the right wing, essentially. It's a very right wing thing in the current incarnation of left and right. But they were always headed towards this dichotomy, essentially, the left and the right. That's why when things were good, the left could easily like pull the new atheist sort of like, where's God? I don't see him in the clouds kind of reductionism. Whereas Jordan Peterson rebuilds the worldview of people with the meaning and purpose of God incarnate in Jesus Christ, but as a spirit otherwise. And that's why Jordan Peterson heals people by the millions, and Richard Dawkins gets one-shotted and thinks Claude is sentient or conscious, the AI, LLM, language learning model, and doesn't believe in a conscious universe, right? Like the lesser is conscious, not the greater. But what we know is the total universe has consciousness in it, whereas there's no proven consciousness in the AI. So we know at least some of this universe is sentient. So why not? There's a total sentience in the universe called God. You know, whereas there's no evidence in Claude, the AI. So then, and if there's a sentience in the universe, then what that means is that there's a relationship to people you should have, because it's also your relationship to the universe. And therefore, the autistic sort of, because the reason why atheists are slightly more intelligent on average than religious believers is because they're autistic, essentially. And autism is a very lonely sort of, I don't think about people at all kind of approach. And we find that they're rather dysfunctional, the autistic people. I'm one of them, probably. I'm kind of dysfunctional. But I've had this revelation or experience of God, so I've had to think socially more often now, and I find it helps my relationships with people, and it actually works for things. So it's functional. But I don't approach it as functional, I approach it as true. And I provide my arguments for why I believe it is the case, and let my arguments speak for themselves in regards to the God thing. But I wholeheartedly believe in God. Now it gets exhausting having to think 24/7 about like what the Omni Man, not Invincible, but like the actual Omni Man, the all things man, God, thinks of me 24/7. It's exhausting, and I get tired of it once in a while. But it is actually helpful to an extent that I would never have developed on my own without what I consider God's intervention, essentially. And essentially, my arguments are to open someone up to the experience if God provides some going one way or the other, possibly anecdotal, circumstantial sort of evidence of his existence. What my attempts are to do is to open someone up to the experience if God gives a funny, sort of weird, sort of, it's kind of weird, but it worked, seems to maybe point to God a little bit kind of experience himself. So I'm not necessarily trying to hard shut, close case God's existence, but I'm trying to open people up to the possibility of God. And then if God wants to give them a funny experience that maybe points to him, it will make them go like, I wonder if that's the case or not. So to consider God's existence. Be open to it, essentially, not necessarily hardcore believers right away. And let God do the rest of the work, essentially, for my evangelization. But this God thing is what convinced me to atone so hardcore for my beliefs. So I understand why people are afraid of it. Because when they say the wages of sin are death, they mean literally anything. Like you stub your toe and say darn, essentially, and you go to hell. And I understand why people object to that, because it's like, it seems so unfair. And I'm not going to get into the logic of God's infinite, so any bad against him is infinitely bad, because he's worth infinite and you're not. Like a master-slave dichotomy, essentially. Although some people do get into that kind of dichotomy. But that's why Jesus is infinitely good on your behalf. Which is why when you're in Jesus, you don't have to be perfect. But then that leads to the problem of, am I in Jesus or not? No. That's not what I'm going to appeal to here. What I'm going to appeal to is that God's existence convinced me to try and atone and then calm me down again, essentially. And while I'm currently in the process of recovering for a while, the experience gave me a lot of insight into the structure of the universe and a hunger for understanding the metaphysics that I had not previously had. And it allowed me to develop more of a deep structure of the world with a certain degree of predictive power for why things are the way they are. And maybe even, if I have any political influence or anything like that, helped guide people to embodiment of structured meaning and purpose, as opposed to meaningless chaos and anarchy. And what one finds is there's two types of approach to freedom. And personally, I don't want to give up either of them, but they do compete with each other to some extent, and balancing them for maximum of both is important. Now, granted, I will preface this by saying you are never free from God's command. You are free to God's command, not from his command. So he's always in charge no matter what. But your experience of him forbidding things will change to his experience of encouraging you to do other things. And that's a replacement of fear-driven, don't do the harmful thing, harm reductionism, to the do the good thing, desired outcomes approach, essentially. That's one of the purposes of God's intervention, essentially. To God, not away from hell. So instead of constantly treading water barely above hell, you swim to shore on the tropical island to relax and enjoy not taquitos. Those are good though. Margaritas. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like that's the approach you're supposed to take with this whole thing. And the don't do the horrible thing because you will get a horrible fate is the initial training regimen, not the end goal of your Christian life, essentially. The end goal of your Christian life is to do what's right. And you don't have to be perfect at it. And there is this constant tension no matter who you are, essentially, no matter who you are, of being between heaven and hell in this life. And that is unavoidable, that's inescapable. We all have it, essentially. We all fall between essentially the worst thing ever and the best thing ever. And we're never going to get out of in between those things. We're just going to move towards what's worse or what's better, but they're infinitely bad or infinitely good, and we're just going to move towards one or towards the other essentially over our lifetimes. And don't get me wrong, like, um, you know, you might move temporarily towards something and then move in the opposite direction for the rest of the time. Towards the good temporarily and then towards the bad, or towards the bad temporarily and then towards the good. Um, but so you can't be 100% certain all the time of where you're going. We all have our ups and downs, but that's part of life. And that uncertainty is what leads people to do the wrong thing, essentially, when they know they should do the right thing, because they are afraid, essentially. And what they do is they revert, and this is the sinful mind or the worldly mind, essentially. One reverts from doing the good thing because it's good to doing the bad thing because they are afraid of getting bad things to them. And essentially my goal in this video, and what my goal going forwards is going to be, probably, instead of doing politics directly, is to get the left in, or people, into a position where they can communicate the values of the right to the left in a way that the left can understand. Basically, it's either accept the right's existence and its dominance for the next 20, 30 years, essentially, or supremacy. I don't want to say 100%, but like 80% maybe, or 70% maybe, or even 60%. But 60%, 40%, still 60% is bigger. So it's going to be something like that. And live with it. They don't have to like it much, but they have to live with it without trying to murder all the right. And basically my goal going forwards, essentially, is to get the left in a position where they can understand the right in a way that doesn't caricature the right, so they can live with the right instead of trying to murder the right and then getting shot because they tried to murder someone. And then complain about it and call themselves and then like how people say rest in power, and he's a martyr for the left, and then try and murder more people and then they get shot. So I'm going to leave the militancy more or less to the other right to punish the left for trying to hurt the right unfairly. And I'm going to move to a peaceful sort of existence somewhat. I'll still banter, I'll still talk hot shit if someone talks hot shit to me. But I'm going to move more consciously to a peacemaking direction, hopefully. And educational sort of approach in the goals of providing the peaceful arm as opposed to the militant arm of the right wing, essentially. And then if the left calms down, which is my goal essentially in my future endeavors, then the right can calm down as well. And the only thing that will happen is we get rid of the immigrants, and the left will have to give up on communism. Those two are non-negotiable, essentially. Give up on communism or socialism, and give up on mass immigration. And give up on not punishing criminals for doing bad things to people. Essentially, that's all they have to give up. That's all I'm expecting them to give up on. Essentially, yeah, that's like literally all I expect them to give up on. You can be a shoe on head. You can be a sort of like, I want cheap healthcare for the poor kind of person. That's fine. I like that actually. But like the communism, socialism, the mass immigration, and the soft on crime, especially towards minorities who murder the majority members, um, is going to have to stop essentially. It, those are the non-negotiable parts, but the rest is like, personally, the other right wing will care about it, but I won't care about it essentially. Um, and the whole like we have to murder half the population because they're conservative kind of a rhetoric and the assassination culture and so on. That's going to have to stop too. So those four things are going to have to stop: mass immigration, socialism, soft on crime, and trying to kill off the right wing. Those have to stop essentially before the right wing will calm down essentially. Um, and the right is only going to get more militant, and it's going to gain more support the more the left pull, the more militant the left is essentially, because the left is shot its shot and it's spent, and they're just lashing out angrily in their death throes essentially as a movement currently. And the more they drag it out, the harder it's going to be on them, and the harder it's going to be on more of them essentially. If they accept their loss essentially in the zeitgeist, then it'll be a lot easier to smoothly transition from woke to basically shoe on head. Like, she's pretty popular. She's kind of left of center, you know. Um, Essentially, non-trader, nice things for people, caring for people kind of approach, essentially. Um, Now, I know full well that that will morph into wokeism again, but I'm willing to accept the temporary cessation of wokeism in the left for peace in our time, essentially. But notice how they have to drop the militancy before peace in our time. So we're basically, essentially, it's not Neville Chamberlain in the sense of like he's just a coward or something. Because Neville Chamberlain was getting Britain ready for war, and then Churchill capitalized on the setup that Neville Chamberlain did while negotiating peace. So Britain wasn't ready for war. Neville Chamberlain put it on the getting ready for war path, and then negotiated peace to buy time so Britain was ready. And he's unfairly maligned as a coward. And Churchill is said to be the hero that saved Britain alone, almost. But actually, Neville Chamberlain set up what Churchill fulfilled, essentially, in beating the Nazis. And basically, what I'm saying is we're already in militancy, and the left is going to have to surrender, essentially. The left is going to surrender one way or another, eventually, by breaking them or by calming down, one or the other. They're either going to calm down or they're going to be broken. And if they calm down, then the right will calm down, and then we can smoothly transition to a more stable society again. Basically, that's the only thing that can happen, other than the right and the left escalating until the right, with the current zeitgeist in its favor, breaks the left apart, breaks it in half, shatters its people with no remorse. And what the left is currently experiencing in its almost rabies sort of panic is They don't understand that the right is consciously raising the bar on hostilities in response to the left doing it first, essentially. And that's why I'm not a right. That's why I'm not a left winger. I'm a right winger because I saw the left do it, and I know I was part of doing that in the first place when I was woke, back in 2008 to 11. I saw it in 2011 to 2014 as well, and I saw it from 2014 to 2026. I saw the left continually escalating the violent rhetoric and the attacks and the domineering on the regular people kind of behavior and so on. And what the left consistently does is it assumes it's normal because it was normal from 1945 onwards, increasingly, not totally, but increasingly. And what they fail to understand is that civilizationally, on the millennia scale, the left is an aberration. It's the freaks. And what we're returning to with the end of the post-World War II consensus is the civilizational, generational thinking and values and so on, not the leftward values and thinking. And what we find is at the end of the left is a lack of principles, essentially, in materialism and get what you can while it's good, because nothing else matters, nothing matters, and it's all shit. But what the right says is, despite it being shit, we have to struggle on so that things get better. I know the left talks about that, but you can't do that with materialism. You have to have spirituality of some sort. Like even believing in justice or truth or goodness or beauty or honor, right? Doing the right thing requires an understanding of something beyond material, what I get for myself. And the destruction of that beyondness is leftist. And the destruction of the beyondness of beyond material, what I get, is what leads to leftism and so on. And what people are waking up to is essentially that the right has actual higher values, and the left is degrading any higher values they supposedly had. They got into power at first by promising good things for the poorest of us, and then they invited a bunch of people that made life worse for the poorest of us. And then they said that for those people's values, good, those people's good. But those people aren't part of our people. Our poorest people are part of our people. And what we find is there is actually a mechanism by which competition in markets, especially local markets, not global markets, in regards to sweatshop labor and slave labor and factory offshoring and so on, which is why the neoliberals are the beginning of the path to socialism, essentially. And that's a mistake. That's a bad behavior. That's bad. We don't want socialism. We want competitive markets locally and protection abroad. And what we want is what the right wing can actually give, essentially. We've tried the leftist path and it's completely failed on every level for our good, but people are married to it because of the propaganda, because of the conditioning. And what the right is doing currently is developing a theory and principle of operations and worldview that lines up fully, because it's not materialism. It's not just nothing matters. It's except what I can get for myself. There's value and purpose and meaning in what we do for good and bad objectively, and developing the full structure of worldview that the left decimated in its quest for power. And this right and wrong worldview builds societies up, it builds civilizations up, and we're getting rid of the people that have no interest in participating, the immigrants, because they have blue and orange morality to our black and white morality, or black, white, and gray morality, rather. So we can have black, white, and gray, and they can have orange and blue. But we're not going to tolerate them being in us, among us, because they don't want to shift to us. And because there's so many of them already, and the fact is that the left will not stop trying to shove them into our lands, so that they're our problem with their blue and orange morality, we have to get rid of all of them, essentially, to nullify the left's client base completely. And the harder the left tries to shove them in, the more of them we're going to have to get rid of. So if we have 5 million immigrants from 30 years ago, and we have 10 million illegal immigrants today, and they shove in another 5 million on top of that, we're going to have to get rid of the 25, not the 20 million. Or the 20 million, not the 15 million, rather. We're going to have to get rid of the illegal immigrants from the 10 and the 5, but we're also going to have to get rid of the 5 million illegal immigrants from 30 years ago, at the rate things are going, just to stabilize our civilization. Because the left is implacably, seemingly dedicated to shoving in foreigners into our lands. And we don't want those foreigners because they have orange and blue morality, and we have black, white, and gray morality. And I don't have any objective antagonism to saying we have the white morality. We know black morality. We know gray morality. We have the white morality. And they have the orange and blue morality, which is better than our black morality, the left, but it's worse than our white morality, the right. Now, some people might say this is racist or something like that, and I'm not going to deny the racial element that, yes, whites do have better morality than blacks, typically, demographically, per capita. It is a statistical phenomenon that whites have better morality than minorities or colored people. But that reason is because the minorities, when their orange and blue morality fails, they revert to a black morality system, the left. And they ally to the black morality, the left. And I'm not even going to say that the left was the black morality for the entire time. But we do need to balance out, and currently the left is black morality, and the right is white morality, essentially. And white means good, and black means bad. Now, that might have a racial element to it as well, or an orange and blue morality to the minorities native to our societies. But ultimately, we want everyone to be white morality. So we want Christianity to consume not consume, but dominate the world, essentially. We want Christianity to reign supreme, not Marxism or Islam or Hinduism or communism or voodoo. Now, the Christian path has a certain dichotomy where it's like, how hard do we fight on the borders of Christianity against our enemies versus how much self-sacrifice do we make for people to make it worth fighting for as white morality, essentially. But there's no argument in any serious group of people that Christianity is in fact the best moral system. Everyone complains about its impossibility, not its lack of morality, if they're serious. And the only people that think they're objecting to Christian morality are the people that haven't studied Christian morality. So their ignorance is why they don't like Christianity, essentially. And I can legitimately say that because I've been atheist, like an Albert Camus sort of existentialist until I was 31, and then God came into my life, and so on. But even naturally attuned towards Christian morality by the Arthurian mythos and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Homeric epics, it was still foreign to me, and I didn't appreciate it, and I argued against it, like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Samuel Harris. And basically, what you learn when you get serious about Christianity is that there's a lot of minding yourself and your business, but there's also a lot of spread the word. So you talk about your faith and you practice your faith. But you see, it's not Islam or voodoo or something like that where you murder people to control people, to force them so much. There might be a crusader element. Like any given system has a militant arm, essentially, for politics or philosophy or culture or civilization. But the Christian version of it is much more muted in the militancy than all the other systems combined in their dovishness or dove-like nature. So we're not so different, but yes, we are very different kind of relationship between Christianity and the other civilizational belief systems, essentially. And that's why their orange and blue morality and leftism as lack of culture is black, and Christianity is white-based morality, white meaning good and black meaning bad, and orange and blue meaning suboptimal, and so on. I'll give an example of why Christianity is better than Marxism in one simple explanation. Christianity endorses giving. Christianity is about encouraging people to give from themselves. Marxism or socialism is about taking from other people against their will to give to other people, yet other people, while taking a cut for your own profit. Obviously, Christianity is superior. Socialism is driven by envy, and envy is a sin. Christianity is motivated by, if you have, please give, it would be very kind to do so, and appealing to someone's better nature. This does not mean Bill Gates' so-called philanthropy of like spreading mosquitoes through Southeast America. This is about, I see someone poor and I give them $5 and a pack of smokes or something. Or we have a charity that our members of our church give to voluntarily without being forced to or abused into giving. For housing the homeless. Now, credit where it's due, essentially, the social system of basic welfare and maybe some degree, possibly at the moment, of socialized housing is acceptable. So credit to the left where it's due. We're not trying to get rid of necessarily both of those things. The socialized housing is a little debatable, but maybe if we made it mental health housing and we just made it a renter's market or a buyer's market for housing by getting rid of the immigrants and allowing our population decline to naturally show itself so that the market responds and then rent becomes like half as much or a quarter as much as what it costs now, right? And the people that rent out the houses will like have to like fight for people to rent to them or rent from them rather, because we got rid of the immigrants. That's the numerical supply and demand argument for getting rid of the immigrants. Then the people that can manage market housing at all could go into market housing, and it could be really cheap, and we could live good lives off less money than we have now, essentially. Even if we were to do that, or much better lives than we had before on the same amount of money, because rent is so much cheaper. So people wouldn't be so homeless as much. It wouldn't be thousands of homeless in my hometown. It would be 100, like it was before. Like it's not like this isn't like a hypothetical better scenario. It's literally what we lived out before socialism and leftism came into power in Canada. So it's not hypothetical. We can go back to what we had before if we do things to move back to where we had it before in some sense. But the argument is that if we just go back to exactly what we had before, then we would fall apart all over again really quickly. So the answer to that is to reinstill the traditions, the enchanted worldview, the meaning and purpose of life, and to focus on it essentially, and to cultivate people who are strong of spirit and wise in metaphysics and driven to instill the values and the full spectrum of experience of meaning, purpose, good, evil, and how it works in the deep structures of reality to the next generations via tradition, essentially. That's what the tradition shorthand is for, basically. All of those things that we had in the past that we don't have now. That's what shorthand of tradition means in some sense. But and what that will do is essentially that's the culture changing the politics. And when the culture is healthy, the politics will become healthier as a result. You'll notice the rise of feminism and wokeism poison culture, and now the stories are absolute shit, and suddenly the politics goes to hell. But in the 90s and 2000s, we had strong culture and politics. We had strong culture and reasonable politics to some extent. They were getting worse. They were getting more leftist in the current incarnation because of the ending of the post-war consensus and the fetishization of the Allies. And that doesn't mean like they just like say they can do no wrong, but it means they misrepresent what the Allies actually stood for. It's a fetish. It's not a real desire to be like the Allies of World War II. It's a comical caricature. And basically, what one will find is essentially the left simultaneously says, oh, the Allies are so great, they beat the Nazis. Oh, but they were still fascist because they had segregation against blacks. It's like, okay, we don't need segregation necessarily by force, but we should allow people to associate with who they actually want to, more or less. Maybe we have business or something where we associate with customers we don't necessarily like and we tolerate them, but that's for business. Um, you know, like maybe we have coworkers we don't like, but we tolerate them because we have to get by with them day to day because it's work, not vacation, right? Whereas in vacations, we associate with exactly who we want to. In friends, like who we want to associate with is a very important freedom of association thing because forcing people to deal with people they don't want to deal with is actually in of itself sort of harmful outside of the requirements of product being productive. Basically, if we can avoid it, we don't want to do it, and that's why immigration is bad because the natives don't want to deal with the immigrants for the most part. We don't want to deal with them. You can cry about it, you can rage against us, you can whine about it, but in the end, it is what it is. We don't want orange and blue morality. We want black, white, and gray morality so we can accurately assess the value of a proposition without being flooded and invaded by people with ulterior systems of belief. So that we can separate our best people from our worst people within our own culture without fighting a foreign invasion. And the left will cry about it, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the foreigners first, and then we're going to crush the left. We're going to get rid of the orange and blue morality that's confusing things and making things worse than white morality, and is the foreign occupation of our people by aliens. And then we're going to crush the black morality of the leftists. And we're going to replace it with either a gray morality, which is a calmer left or less leftist impulse, while not necessarily being right-wing impulse, but something like Camus instead of Sartre for a gray morality, essentially. So it's not the best, but it's functional. The gray morality. And we're going to replace black with gray and white morality, essentially, after we get rid of orange and blue morality. Anyways, yeah. And the thing is, objectively speaking, the facts are on the right side of things at the moment. Like, the left did have some points about, like, the internal taking care of our own people sort of approach to some extent, but it's the full execution of the left's desires is inappropriate. The right, however, is more appropriate to have the full execution of, maybe not entirely, but more full execution of than the left ever could be. The left can nudge slightly, but the right holds the line against falling apart, essentially. And I do believe that there's a certain truth to the idea that we will move towards a new system of relations in society to a certain extent. But it's not going to be leftist. It's going to remain right of center or right wing. I don't consider the conservatives to be right wing. I don't consider Farage to be right wing. So, like, one of the things about the right wing is that it's very hostile to the left rhetorically in terms of, like, its attitude, but it's very humanizing. So it says the left is bad, and says, like, well, if you attack ICE officers and get shot, well, you got what you deserve. But it's very, like, ground level morals. And morals are scalable in a civilization, and ethics are not. Ethics don't scale to complexity, where morals are right at every point. So a moral leader of a country is right on every level, and an ethical leader of a country is wrong on most levels. Because ethics implies total control of the system. Morals implies control over yourself. And how you relate to other people is more important than how you relate to everyone as the leader, because most people are not the leader. And what we find is no one's perfect, so the leader cannot be totally moral, and they cannot be totally ethical. But the ethical requires all or nothing, and the moral requires rough direction, because it's less total system. It's more interpersonal. So instead of pass-fail, we get a gradient of relationship quality, essentially. And it's impossible to be perfect. So ethics always fails. But you can be good, which is why morality is superior. And all of the enchantment, values, meaningfulness, purpose, deeper metaphysics, relations of people, and psychology and self and other and so on, or self and self, or self and God, the group dynamics and so on, all of that information goes into the right wing, essentially. That's why the left doesn't want to talk about it, because when you investigate the deeper levels of reality, the right-wing worldview naturally emerges more often than the left. That's why the left has to tear everything down culturally. That's why it's dead and stale and two-dimensional and flat. Whereas the right is, when it's actually embodied culturally, metaphysically, and so on, has a certain vibrancy. So you have, like, Captain Marvel, the movie, or you have, like, you know, what's it called? You have Dustborn, the game, with, like, I think it was like 60 players total. And you have Susu no Frieren, which is like 3 million copies every volume or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a complete vote with your wallet, staggering difference between right-wing values and worldview and embodiment versus left-wing when it's actually realized. And that's what the whole, like, we don't want anything to do with feminism or transsexuals or homosexuals or whatever, or racial politics, grievance mongering of blacks on whites, failure of leftist video game developers is showing is that the popularity is on the right wing with its worldview, not the left wing. And BlackRock, the soulless mega corporations sucking people's money out of their pockets on fraudulent promises while investing in dead end, unproductive projects can um, support those game companies all at once, the woke ones. But at the end of the day, it's a draining effect on the finances. And the productive earn money approach is the right wing approach. And all the banning of right wing games and all the censorship and all the credit card companies banning it and so on is just fighting the inevitable, essentially. And you might ask the left why the credit card companies and BlackRock and Bill Gates are on their side. You might ask them that. And why the right wing has Rupert Lowe and Sargon, self-made businessmen, right? Or like J.D. Vance, who grew up impoverished and by his natural talent and effort and discipline rose to the top of U.S. politics. But you might ask why that's the dichotomy, essentially. Yeah. Or like why Bernie Sanders talks about billionaires paying taxes, not millionaires paying taxes now, after he became a millionaire. The hypocrisy of it. You know. And we need to move away from the belief that we rule the world, essentially, and therefore are responsible for every little thing that happens. That is not a healthy mindset. That causes God complexes in the left and unfairly handicaps the right when it exists. The truth is, you are responsible for yourself and your children and your friends and your family. But even those responsibilities have limitations compared to the responsibility for yourself. Essentially, the right is more personal responsibility for myself, and if enough people do it, then it works really well. It works amazingly. It's the best system there is. This is why we got to cultivate it. The left uses the someone else is responsible for all of us kind of approach. And they fail at it. It doesn't work. Because the US Constitution and Anglo traditions are only good for a moral and godly people, totally unfit for atheist socialists. Basically. In the end, we want as many decent people as possible to be cultivated, not for a impossibly perfect system to be attempted and failed and destroy everyone all the goddamn time. We want less system, more personal morals, not more system and less personal morals. Because the personal morals, when enough people do it, is in fact a system on its own, but you can't think systemically about it, or it doesn't work. It's a personal relations model. So you have to think of yourself as the system, not the system as yourself. And ultimately what happens is there is no substitute for the good that more and more people thinking morally on their own behavior engenders. There's no replacement for it if you want the good life. There's none. It has to be that way. There's no other way. And failure to cultivate self and develop self and other people around you in a relational web, not a one person overall kind of approach, is the reason why things are so bad. Because we moved away from personal responsibility and godliness and morality towards atheism, secularism, and socialism. And the more we move towards it, and the less meaningfulness we decided things had, the worse things got, essentially, after a point. It's sort of like a cocaine binge or something versus like eating good food, right? Like it's like you're going to burn out and crash eventually if you do it that way. But the other one is good and rewarding, gives you some energy and lets you keep going. And the goal of life is continuity, not heights of glory and then dying, for most people. And the left fails to understand that. Most people want continuity, not glory and death, essentially. And don't get me wrong, both are exist in various peoples all across the world, so it's a common human difference between people in some sense. But the right says that for the individual in the right situation, the left says it should be forced onto all people, glory and death. The right allows people to individually choose glory and death or continuity. The left tries to force glory and death on people while ignoring continuity. But continuity is the foundation of why glory and death for an individual is a good thing in their case. So yeah. Anyways, I've been going on for a while. I think I got it covered mostly. I will mention that it's not that there aren't like various aspects to left and right and foreigners that aren't similar in like an individual, but like the exact web of connections and the relations of the individual points is what makes it wrong or right for us. And what's right for us is best for the world, essentially, is what I'm saying. Now, someone might say, oh, you want to conquer the brown people. And it's like, no, 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 no. I want to leave them alone to either succeed or fail based on their own merits. Not play enabler to their crippling welfare addiction instead of giving them or letting them succeed on their own merits, essentially. Not welfare crippling addiction enabler, but example for how to succeed is the model I want. And we should also practice that example, not enabler behavior within our own borders, essentially more so than we currently are. We should also accept, admittedly, that some people cannot fend for themselves naturally and provide the resources to maintain themselves and be semi-comfortable, at least, let's say, I think. And I'm being a little welfare-minded because I'm on welfare. I'm on disability. So, like, you know, but it is my belief. I do believe in that. I don't think it's that hard because I remember being on disability and, like, it was like 2/3 or 3/4 of minimum wage at the time as opposed to 60% of minimum wage. And the tax burden was lower back then on 3/4 minimum wage than it is now on 60% minimum wage. And that's a function of how many people were put on disability and not working, essentially. So I think we need to audit people and kick them off disability, but we need to also, at the same time, provide job markets for them and so on, which means we kick out the immigrants so that the jobs open up for us. So it needs to be simultaneous, essentially. Or at least close one after the other, essentially. As we go, essentially. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better than just everyone's on welfare and no one gets anything done, which is the inevitable leftward trajectory. And then everyone starves. No figure, no shit. That's what communism is. It's literally you don't get the money you earned. It gets given to people who didn't earn anything, and then you don't work because it's not worth it anymore. And then everyone else starves because you only made enough for yourself, not to sell for extra money. It's so basic. You're working against self-interest as a leftist, and you're working with self-interest as a right-winger, essentially. Or at least basic self-interest. The reason the left has a God complex and so on, I don't know exactly, but they do, it's the whole ethics total system. I'm going to act like I'm in charge even when I'm not kind of approach. And yet at the same time, even when I'm in charge, I'm not going to act responsible approach. It's like simultaneously you're God and you're the devil. As opposed to you're human. And responsible for your behavior, not others. Mostly. But we can return to a 2000s approach maybe to welfare disability, and it'll be less tax burden than we have with the immigrants, and it'll be better for the people who are actually on disability, but we have to also get rid of a few people on disability because there's too many people that were put onto it that shouldn't be on it. And we get rid of the immigrants, and we don't give them benefits, and then suddenly the money's opened up for the people that remain on disability, and also the jobs open up for the people we kick off disability so they can actually work for real. And then they earn money that's better than what they get on disability ever. And then the people that are on disability don't get unfairly lower amounts than they could get. They get enough. That's why the right is a functional system, not utopia, not an attempt at utopia that leads to disaster. It's functional, it's good, it's not trying for perfection and leading to nightmare hell. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Oh, and I will mention there is a need for perfectionism and total evil in our souls. There's a need for those markers, essentially. But if you don't blame the devil as ultimate evil, and you don't credit God as ultimate good, you're going to do it in people who are just people. And that is unfair to the person. So you can call Hitler evil, but you don't call him the most evil thing in existence. You call Satan the most evil thing in existence. You can say Hitler is a servant of Satan, but you don't call Hitler Satan. You always leave the option for evil to exist. You always leave the option to declare something evil when it's evil, even if it's opposed to or for the same side of Hitler. Because it's evil. You don't confuse a person with being evil incarnate, necessarily. I know people do say that and so on the right and so on, but like what I mean is it's more of a rhetorical flourish on their case, not a structural assumption like the left does. And the structural assumption needs to be there is something more evil than any evil person that ever existed. And there's something better than any good person that ever existed. And people ain't either of those things. They can be good, they can be bad, they can be great, they can be evil, but they're not the most great good, and they're not the most evil bad. You always leave room for something better or worse to exist in some fashion, basically. And that applies to Epstein as well, by the way. You know, I mean, Epstein's pretty close to the most evil thing, but like like Hitler's pretty bad too. So like it's an anti-Jew and it's a Jew who's anti-Gentile, anti-Goyim. So it's like, okay, which one? Well, they're both bad. They're opposites. Stalin's the opposite of Hitler in a way too. So you have like bad again, evil. You're able to pronounce these evil people evil even when they disagree with each other. So you're not forced to pick a side. You're able to pick your own side. And what that does is, in my case, it allows me to be thankful for Trump for certain things, but annoyed at Trump for other things. So I'm not worshiping Trump, but I'm also not like hating Trump. And basically what you allow essentially is you try to be good, but you allow God to fill in the perfection element so you can be satisfied somewhat. When you're burnt out, you can be satisfied, okay, self-care time essentially, and relax. Or like a little bit before you burn out or something. So you put in the workout mentally and morally, and then you go, okay, time to rest in a balanced way with an emphasis on effort. So you work hard, you play hard, you sleep hard, as opposed to you burn out, you collapse, you are always angry. Or you burn out, you're very angry, and then you collapse. You work hard, you play hard, you rest hard. Now, one of those is somehow dead inside and empty, and the other one is very vibrant and alive and fulfilling. And that's why the right-wing worldview actually works, because it's embodied where things matter. And, I know it's hard for people to like think it matters if they're like a door greeter at Walmart, but like you are actually doing something. You know what I mean? So like the perpetually online jobless activists, which I'm part of essentially, and which is something I've been wrestling with, because I think I had some influence politically, but I'm not sure. I might have had some influence with someone who's popular, but like either they're not listening to me now, or like they're not showing it. Sort of. They might have showed it, but like, I've been talking about this for a while to myself, essentially online, and gravitating towards this principle more so, which is, if I move towards something closer to a job, I'll be less perpetually online brain, doom scroll, brain rot, politically minded, and actually do something worthwhile to people in of itself, as opposed to prevent worse things. And this is part of my right-wing journey, essentially, where I'm going to work on something that provides value to people directly, hopefully, in camaraderie and enjoyment and purpose and meaning and conflict resolution. And I don't want to say therapy like a licensed therapist, but like I'll have like some sort of soul work collection done on myself that I can share with other people to help resolve some of their tensions. and this will have, and if I succeed at this, then it will have more direct, meaningful influence because it will basically move people towards the right more so politically, so that political brain rot element is satisfied. But the goal is not to move them politically rightward. The goal is to make them live fuller lives. And I just happen to believe at the moment that moving to the right will inevitably occur, or like be part of that journey essentially, as the left and right currently stand, which wasn't always the case, but it is as it stands now, of course, because it is as it stands. So something like going to closer to Jordan Peterson pre-2018, 2019, and away from Jordan Peterson in the 2020s, and with his collapse at the moment, health-wise. And I'll still be strong on my politics, and I've got the arguments and rhetoric and the knowledge and the wisdom of how to argue for politics and so on. But I'm going to move away from you have to be right-wing or you have to be left-wing, politics, doom scroll, brain rot brained, simple, shallow kind of bullshit, to a fuller vision of life itself, essentially, as the primary goal. And if you're more left or you're less left or you're more right or you're less right because of it, I might nudge, gently suggest rightward shifts, but if you choose to go left, I'm still going to work on making your life fuller, essentially, as a person. And I just happen to believe it'll lead to more right-wing people, so it'll satisfy my doom scroll, brain rot, politics brain, jobless, activist itch, at least on that front, initially. And then the goal is to move away from that as the satisfactory itch scratch as I experience success, bringing people to fuller lives more on its own terms. So it's a move away from the brain rot to the fuller living, and my motivations will change, I suspect, as I go along with it. And I'll let people decide whether they want to be more or less left or more or less right words on their own terms. I'll just try and bring people to fuller living and more meaning in their lives and purpose and like resonance with like stories and like not just feelings in the blind sense, but like feelings like those sort of like natural intuitions of a human soul based on their type of personality, that something that functions better somehow, whether it's left or right at all, is my goal, essentially, to bring that forwards to people. I'm not going to say to heal people only, but to cultivate bigger people. And the reason, I already mentioned why I think that's right-wing in a sense, because the left is reductionist and materialist, and the right is very enchanted and values-driven. And basically, there's going to be fake leftists, and there's going to be fake right-wingers, people who LARP and are very cruel and savage and not very resonant with the actual right-wingers and so on. And my goal is going to be to embody and cultivate genuine right-wing values in some sense, of embodiment and cultivate and values and deep structural resonance in the fabric of the universe and the person. And essentially, if I do it right and my worldview is correct, then the cruel, savage LARPers on the right will be outpopulated and nullified by the popularity of the genuine right wing, I want to call it. And that will be how the right calms down, by embodying its truest values, whereas the left needs to calm down by abandoning its farthest excesses. Now that's an assessment, like I keep saying, for at the moment. It might be a more general sort of truth. I don't know. But that's my assessment at the moment. Yeah, so politics, metaphysics, psychology, myth, literature, culture, art, media, community, socializing, gaming, jokes, banter, is going to be more important in some sense than before in me going forwards, once I get my new computer and can actually live stream video gameplay of entertaining games with a friend and co-host, than politics currently is. I'm not sure the exact balance of how I'm going to manage that, or exactly what's going to happen. I have no idea really, but I suspect very heavily that it's going to be moving towards that group of things away from politics directly, on some level. It'll be more muted. I might explain that I believe that it'll lead to it, but the purpose is going to be fuller lives for the people that follow me, and so on. And basically, I'm just waiting on the gear to do so, and gradually hyping myself up to move towards the cultural direction and the traditional direction and the community direction or socializing direction, and the metaphysical philosophy direction, the faith direction, and away from politics. I'm hyping myself up for the transition when it becomes available, essentially. And that's my personal angle for why I'm making this video, to explain in a way that I hope the left can understand my worldview, and why I'm cranky sometimes at leftists, and I might strategize against them, but at the same time, I don't necessarily hate the individuals that are left of center, as long as they're not totally brain rotted. I've forgotten the name of the guy who shot Charlie Kirk, but I can hate him and I can hate the people that are cheering on his death, but I don't necessarily hate Shoe on Head or my communist friend or my anarchist friend or my sort of centrist, slightly right of center friend, or there's like a fourth person, I think. Who else is there? I don't hate my anti-Trump dad. I don't hate my anti-Trump mom. You know what I mean? I can have a social network of people that are very different people in a way, even from me, and we just get by because we believe in each other as people. right? And then like I'll let the embodiment of value, tradition, culture, deep layers of structures of reality, the enchantment of the world in meaning and purpose, do the right word push for me like I think it will, and I don't care if it does. I care that the enchantment occurs. And then people will live fuller lives. Now, on the political angle, the things I want to see are kick out the immigrants, end the socialism, stop calling to kill all the conservatives, and ending wokeism, essentially. But aside from those four things, I want everyone to succeed in my civilization. Now, I don't consider the immigrants to be part of my civilization, so they have to go home. But everyone else in our borders, in our civilization, I want to succeed. I happen to have a belief on how that will occur. I happen to believe there's one way only that it can occur primarily, or at least the maximum that can happen, essentially. But I can tolerate people having what I consider suboptimal beliefs. I can tolerate it and still care for them as people if I know them personally. And through knowing people personally, I can sort of sympathize with people generally who have similar worldviews. But there's a crucial thing here, which is while I'm going to cultivate those deep resonances of life in people primarily, some leftists are inevitably going to be left out of my consideration for their well-being. But the leftists that have, or like the anarchist, for instance, that sort of talks about Marx and says Trump failed on his own conservative platform's terms, even, and is a bit of a corporatist, and is, I think I said it already, but I'll mention it again. He does value certain Marxist statements, but he's got a relationship with them that isn't sycophantic. He's not a sycophant. He's not a heretic. He's not a heretic. Not a heretic. I mean, he's not a cultist about Marx. Yeah, but he is slightly left of center in some ways, as an anarchist. He's a fuller person than mere woke anarchist. And he builds things instead of tearing down things as his primary focus. He's got a good sense of humor. He believes in himself. He's traveled the world. So he's got an actual relationship with other people around the world. And then there's like my communist friend who still believes in the Second Amendment, and believes in the American system while being a Canadian. Yeah, but he's got a background of living in different countries other than Canada when he was a child and so on. And I accept he's probably got some mixed race, sort of wasn't born in Canada kind of anxiety about the nativist movement in Canada to some extent. And essentially, this is partly a video for him, if he watches it. And, that's the other thing. Friends to our civilization, who are genuine friends to our civilization, are welcome to stay. people who've married into our tribe and haven't committed crimes are welcome to stay. Right? Like, it's not like a blanket, like every person who moved here within the last 50 years has to go. It's more of a sort of like the newest crop has to go fully, basically, or almost fully. And we'll investigate those who've committed crimes of the older batches too, maybe. Maybe. Yeah. Um, but the newest batches have to go, basically. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, they're well within living memory. We were never asked if we wanted them. We don't want them. They were forced onto us against our will. Um, they gotta go. Um, End of story. But my friend, my communist friend who's mixed race and moved to Canada when he was like a teenager, he should be welcome here as far as I'm concerned. He should be considered one of us. Um, yeah. Um, my anarchist friend who's been around the world, he always knew he was different than the people he was with, but he always respected their traditions. He acclimates himself as the foreigner to the locals' traditions. He doesn't try and change the locals to his tradition. He doesn't ignore the locals' traditions and customs. He follows them. So there's a certain mentality resonant here with both of them that I can get along with, essentially, as a native local to Canada. Like, literally, like, Aboriginal and Anglo. So it doesn't matter whether it's 200 years or 10,000 years. I'm native to Canada. Um, and as for the slightly right of center individual, that's my friend. He's more of a heart guy than a brain guy, and he's more focused on being personally fair to people than systematic thinker that like I am, essentially. And basically, the goal of my um, attempt at a career with him is going to be to um, incorporate his heart to my brain and impart my brain to his heart. So it's going to be a softening and a solidification on mine and his side, maybe. Maybe. Um, but it'll be balanced and it'll be like measured because we trust each other's judgment in our own ways. And basically, I'm going to provide the systematic thinking capacity, for the most part, to develop a system of interpretation. But he's going to provide the intuitive personal awareness to match people as people. And what we'll do is we'll work off each other, and he'll develop a better theory of the world through me, and I'll develop a better theory of people through him. He's going to emphasis on him developing a theory of the world, and emphasis on developing a theory of people for me. That's my guess. That's my guess. That's my hope. That's my kind of thing, right? So I'll soften a bit, and he'll like become more solid, essentially. I think that's how it's going to work. we're going to match each other a little bit more as we go along and develop and grow alongside each other. And I'm more militant than he is, and that's including this video. So he should be able to impart on me some more amicable approaches to people, let's say. So it'll be good. It'll be good.